Welcome to Millersville University's Office of Learning Services presentation on skillful reading. By the end of this workshop, you should be able to understand what skillful reading is all about, know the processes it involves, and to have learned some general tips for reading your assigned textbooks. Let's get started. So what exactly is skillful reading? Skillful reading is reading with an agenda. This means that you are reading with a purpose, goal, or objective in mind. You do not want to read with the mindset of just reading enough to complete an assigned reading before class. You want to ensure that you are reading to fulfill your purpose, goal, or objective that you have set for said reading. The following are some goals to set for yourself while reading. First is to answer a specific question. Whether you're reading to help find evidence, to answer a research question, or just a question you may be confused about from your homework or classwork, you may need to focus your reading on answering questions. This may involve not reading a chapter word for word, but looking for the most important information that may relate to your questions. Another goal is to find out technical information. This may include any formulas or verbatim definitions that you may need to help better understand your coursework or to help you solve problems. Next, reading can help you understand and appreciate a new worldview. This is helpful when you are trying to see the full picture of a concept that is debated often, or if you are trying to understand a new or old concept or event to the fullest. The last goal of reading is to be entertained. This can be applied to any books, articles, or other forms of literature that you are reading for fun and on your own time. They may be related to something you are discussing in your coursework, or it could just be a book you are reading on the side. Skillful reading also involves translating the author's ideas into your own. This can be helpful when studying. If you can take the central idea and paraphrase it with your own words, you can assure that you are understanding the concepts that are being discussed in class. Besides, most professors do not want to know what the author said word for word. They want to know if you can understand what the author was saying and put that into your own words for your own understanding. Reflecting on how you can read and adapting it to the text is also involved in skillful reading. There's no one universal way of reading textbooks, and they generally tend to have their own individual layout. Similarly with other books that aren't textbooks or articles, that can affect the way you read it. It all depends on your aim or goal for the reading and the nature of the text. You just have to adjust and reflect back on how you're reading and adjust that based on what you're reading. Reflecting is important to decide if you are reading the text too fast and need to slow down, or to recognize that a paragraph was difficult to understand and you should go back and reread it. This would also be a great time to come up with any questions to ask your professor that may help you understand the text better, especially if it is one that is harder to read and digest in your head. It is important to note that skillful reading is an active process. It requires you to engage in an inner dialogue as you read, which involves the use of metacognition. Metacognition is thinking about your own thinking. Using metacognition helps the reader to engage in a thought process during reading in which they question themselves on their understanding of the text. This relates to reflecting on the reading you just discussed. On the next slide, we are going to discuss some questions to ask yourself while you read to check your understanding. First, ask yourself if you can summarize the reading in your own words. This will help you to see if you are reading too fast or not grasping the concepts that you are reading. If so, you can always go back and reread the parts you do not understand, or you can ask your professor or a classmate to gain clarification. Next, if you can give examples of your own experiences based on what the text is saying, You can generally relate it to your own experiences, and it will help you to better understand what you are reading and to remember it for a future exam or quiz. Similarly, ask yourself if you can generate metaphors or diagrams to illustrate what the text is saying. Diagrams may be helpful for the concepts or events that need to be in a specific order. Lastly, ask what parts of the text are clear to you and what you need to be clarified. As we discussed earlier, that would be a good way to ask a professor for more clarification or even a classmate. Now we are going to discuss in detail how to skillfully read a text. But before we do that, you need to determine the focus of the text, because textbooks focus on special ways of thinking about a specific set of things or problems. An example of this would be that a psychology textbook focuses on answering questions about human behavior. By surveying the text and looking at the title, subheadings, and graphs, or even pictures, and asking yourself about them, you can determine the focus. You want to be sure that you know the focus of the text so that you are not reading anything that may be irrelevant to what you are learning, or to narrow down what sections of the text you need to focus on the most. Reading the summaries or the end of chapter notes will also help you to get an overview about what the text is about. This could also help you to recognize any aspects you may need to go over in more detail to ensure your understanding of the concepts or information. You should also specify your own purpose for reading the text. Remember, your purpose should be to fully understand the text to help you succeed on assignments and quizzes and to help further your knowledge. You are not just reading because your professor told you to. Here are the 5 steps of skillful reading, which we will be discussing in further detail on the following slides. First is paraphrasing. Paraphrasing involves putting the words and thoughts of the author into your own words. You can do this sentence by sentence or paragraph by paragraph, as discussed earlier. To check your understanding of how to paraphrase, pull out a text near you and read a paragraph or two. Then try and put what you read into your own words. Please pause the video now to try it. How did you do? Could you understand what you just read and put it into your own words? If not, try reading this section again. If you still do not understand it, that would be then a section you would want to have some clarification on. The next step is explicating, which means to provide a further explanation. There are a few steps to follow within this section of skillful reading. First, state the most important ideas or points of the paragraph in 1 or 2 sentences. This will ensure that you are fitting only the most important aspects of the paragraph into the sentences. Next, elaborate on what you have paraphrased. You can explain in more detail the most important ideas you picked out from the reading. Then give examples of the meaning by tying it to concrete solutions in the real world. Again, this will help you to better understand and remember the important ideas you just read about. Next, if you can, connect the basic ideas to situations and experiences that are meaningful to you. Like examples, this will make the information easier to understand and recall in the future. Lastly, use metaphors, analogies, and/or diagrams to relate the ideas to issues you already understand. Again, this will be useful when recalling the information during an exam or quiz, or to use as tools when studying. The next step of skillful reading is analysis, which involves examining the logic of what you are reading. You can do this by asking certain questions that help you to make sense of the author's way of thinking. On the next slide, we will discuss what you should analyze in what you are reading to help you do this. Ask what the most significant information or data is within the paragraph. You do not need to remember every single detail all of the time. Determine what the most basic conclusion is in the paragraph. This will help you to analyze the true point of the paragraph. Next, ask what assumptions the paragraph is sharing. This will help you to understand the point of view of the author, and if you need to see if there are any other point of views in other literature that may also be beneficial for your learning and understanding. Next, ask what the most significant implications of the paragraph are. This means that you are determining what impact the information in the paragraph has on any real-world situations. Lastly, analyze what the point of view of the author is, as we discussed earlier. The next step is evaluation. It is important to note that not all paragraphs or texts are of equal quality. You must assess the quality of the text as you read. This will allow you to get a better picture of the information being shared, and if you need to do further investigating to get a more well-rounded understanding of the ideas that are being discussed. The following are what to consider when evaluating a text. First is accuracy. Is the author accurate in what he or she claims? If not, more research may be needed for clarification. Next is fairness. Does the author consider other relevant points of view, or is there any bias evident? If bias is evident, you may want to read a different text on the same concept that is less biased. Look for consistency in the text and for unexplained contradictions that may make the text confusing or does not help support the information enough. Lastly, consider the significance or if the subject is dealt with in a trivial manner. Ask yourself if what you are reading is actually important and will expand your knowledge of a subject, or if it is not important and something you can go without reading but can still succeed in your class. This does not mean to not read any of your textbooks because you feel as though they are not important or significant. It just means to read what you, the author, or your professor feels are the most important subject matters to remember. The last step to skillful reading is to role play the position of the author. You should try and answer questions about the text as if you were the author. Think about what they would say is the most important concepts or ideas to remember and answer the questions from their point of view. To wrap up this workshop, let's just talk about some overall steps to help you read skillfully. First, take notes as you read. This will help you to pay attention to what you are reading and will help you when you are studying or going over material in class. Next is to circle important concepts and underline their definitions. I personally love to use colorful pens or highlighters when writing notes or reading textbook materials because it helps to grab my attention when I have to go back and study the material. If you do not feel comfortable writing directly into your textbook, you can always write the definition down in your notes and highlight, circle, or underline it there. Another tip is to record the author's point of view in the margin when you notice it. This is helpful when trying to determine if there's any bias occurring within the textbook and can help you form questions to ask your professor later. Next, as we talked about in detail earlier, check your understanding. You do not want to read and not understand what the author is saying for the entire time you are reading. Constantly ask yourself if you are understanding what the author is saying. If you're not, check for clarification. Another tip is to write down any questions you may have or put a question mark next to the information so you remember to get clarification on them later in class or during office hours with your professor. Do not forget to formulate your own ideas as they occur to you during reading. This could be a great way to discuss the information in class if you want to share your ideas. Next, diagram important concepts and how they are connected to help them make better sense in your mind. Also, try explaining the text you're reading to a friend. As mentioned earlier, if you can explain it to someone and they can understand what you're saying and it also makes sense to you, then you are really understanding what you are reading. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation on Skillfull Reading. Please be sure to check out our other presentations that are provided by the Office of Learning Services. Feel free to contact our office with any additional questions you may have.